She was 19 and homeless. No room, no family. Willing to claim her, no address. Just a canvas tool roll and $27.43 she had saved from washing dishes behind a bus station. And with that money, she bought a forgotten straw marquetry studio outside Saltville, Smyth County, Virginia, where the lane had vanished from county maps in 1987. The north wall bowed 6 inches outward. Rain came through 3 holes in the roof. The county condemned it on October 14, 2021, with demolition planned for the following spring. But beneath a cedar disc in a straw-inlay box sealed behind a false bottom no one had opened in 34 years, waited a journal, old tools, and 53 on 10. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Mae Bell had been waiting her whole life without knowing it. She grew up in a narrow rental outside Kingsport, Tennessee, where freight trains passed after midnight and made the water glasses tremble in the kitchen cabinet. Her father disappeared before she learned his handwriting. Her mother, Elaine, worked double shifts at a nursing home and measured every week in bus fare, coffee, and unopened bills. Elaine could be tender when she was too tired to guard herself. She braided Ada's hair at the table, pressed a warm palm between her shoulder blades, then rose before dawn without turning on the lights. But she had learned survival as obedience and fear often made her choose the person holding the leash. Ada's real education came from her grandfather, Silas Bell, who lived 2 ridges away in a cedar-sided house with a workshop beneath it. Every Saturday, he set a kettle on the iron stove, sliced rye bread, and opened his straw marquetry chest. He taught her to split rye straw along its seam with a thumbnail, soak it for 12 minutes, flatten it with a bone folder, then draw out its shine against a heated steel plate. They worked at a walnut bench scarred by 3 generations of blades. Silas never hurried her. When a strip tore, he placed another beside it. When a pattern drifted, he turned the board toward the window and let daylight reveal the error. "Patience is not waiting," he told her once. "It is keeping your hand honest while time does its work." Ada understood because his hands never asked the material to become something faster than it could. Silas died in February 2018, 3 days after a stroke. By the time Ada and her mother reached his house, her uncle Raymond had sold the chest-heated plate bone folders and most of the finished panels to an antiques dealer from Knoxville. Ada found only one narrow awl beneath the bench, its pearwood handle darkened where Silas's thumb had rested. Raymond became their landlord the following year after buying the rental from a distant cousin. He spoke quietly, wore polished brown shoes, and kept every receipt in plastic sleeves. Nothing in his manner was loud, yet the rooms changed when he entered. He checked the furnace filter without knocking, counted the bags beside the trash bin, and reminded Elaine that family arrangements could end whenever gratitude became difficult. They ended on March 6, 2022. Ada came home carrying a paper sack of groceries and found her canvas tool roll on the porch, tied with blue clothesline. Raymond stood inside the doorway, with one hand resting on the lock. Elaine remained behind him, holding a dish towel so tightly that the weave had marked her palm. "You have until sunset. Take only what's yours." 8 words. Ada looked at her mother. Elaine lowered her eyes and wiped a clean plate that did not need wiping. The paper sack softened in the rain until 2 apples rolled across the porch boards. Ada caught one with her shoe, placed it back, and understood that no argument would open that door. For 6 weeks, she moved southwest and then east, following cheap buses and places that stayed lit. In Bristol, she slept beneath the loading awning of a closed furniture store, keeping the awl inside her sleeve. In Johnson City, she spent $18.60 on a hostel bunk, then left, when a man in the corridor tried every doorknob after midnight. She rode to Abingdon, where the station benches had metal dividers, and slept sitting upright in a church vestibule after a custodian named Mr. Hale pretended not to see her. Her money fell by exact degrees. $17 after a bus ticket. 11 after soup and aspirin. 7 after washing her clothes in a laundromat near Glade Spring. She learned which gas stations discarded sandwiches at 10, which libraries opened early, and how cold concrete climbed through cardboard before dawn. Once beside the Holston River, she woke with frost silvering the edge of her blanket and found the last photograph of Silas stuck to her cheek. On April 18th, she entered the Smith Bland Regional Library in Marion because rain had soaked through both shoulders of her coat. The librarian, a woman with red reading glasses, pointed her toward a radiator and did not ask why she stayed there 3 hours. Ada opened the classified section of a county surplus circular, mostly to rest her eyes. The notice occupied 4 lines: abandoned craft property, 1-room studio with rear workshop, tax delinquent, structure as is, minimum bid 3 years, sealed offer due April 19th. Below it was a parcel number and the words Bell Hollow Road. Ada read the surname twice. Then she asked for a pencil, filled out the form in careful block letters, and placed 3 wrinkled dollar bills inside the envelope. The remaining coins in her pocket added up to 43 cents. At closing time, she copied the bus route to Saltville onto the back of Silas's photograph. There was no guarantee. The studio still stood, no promise of water heat or a door that locked. But it was a place no one had yet told her to leave. The next morning, Ada boarded the westbound bus, carrying everything she owned in one hand. The bus left Marion at 9:10, climbing west, through wet folds of mountain, where clouds lay low enough to hide the ridgetops. Ada sat beside a window filmed with old fingerprints and held Silas's photograph between both palms whenever the driver leaned into a curve. The route ended in Saltville shortly before noon. From there, the property lay nearly 9 miles away. Ada walked the first 6 along Virginia Route 91, passing limestone cuts, fenced pasture and creek water, the color of hammered pewter. Her coat dried, then grew damp again when the wind shifted. By dusk, she had reached only the outskirts of Broadford. A farmer allowed her to sleep in a hay barn after seeing the canvas roll beneath her arm. The temperature fell to 28 degrees. Ada burrowed between 2 square bales, covered her shoes with loose hay, and woke whenever mice moved inside the walls. At first light, the farmer's wife left a jar of coffee and a biscuit on the gatepost without coming outside. She walked the remaining miles under a pale sky. Saltville announced itself gradually, a weathered sign, a row of modest houses, then Main Street bending between buildings, whose brick fronts had outlasted several kinds of commerce. Ada passed Ria's Cafe, Palmer Hardware, and Feed the Salt Kettle Bakery, McCrady's Barber Shop, and Valley Drug, where a hand-lettered card offered blood pressure checks on Tuesdays. The county office occupied a former bank with narrow windows and stone steps worn shallow at their centers. Inside, radiators clicked beneath a ceiling stained by an old leak. Ada followed a brass arrow marked Property and Deeds and entered a room lined with parcel maps. A woman sat behind the counter sorting forms into wooden trays. A silver pencil was fixed through the coil of her gray hair, and the nameplate before her read MRS, Loretta Vance, Deputy Clerk. Ada placed the county notice on the counter. Mrs. Vance looked at the paper, then at Ada's wet cuffs and mud-darkened shoes. "You are Ada Bell." "Yes, ma'am." "You understand there is no electrical service." "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the well has not been tested." "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the county will not repair the road." "Yes, ma'am." "You understand condemnation remains until inspection." "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Vance removed her glasses. "You answer quickly." "I read the notice 6 times. That is not the same as seeing the place." "No, ma'am." The clerk studied her for several seconds, then unlocked a drawer and lifted out a thin deed packet. The paper smelled faintly of dust and carbon ink. Ada signed where a blue tab marked her name, pressing carefully, because the pen skipped on the second letter. Mrs. Vance carried the deed to a small machine at the end of the counter. She positioned a round brass stamp over the county seal and brought its handle down with both hands. The metal struck with a deep official sound too large for $3. There, she said. Recorded at 12:47. Ada touched the raised impression with one fingertip. The directions were written on the back of a tax map. Follow Route 91 north for 7/10 of a mile. Turn beside the abandoned white church onto Allison Gap Road. Continue past a green cattle gate, then take Bell Hollow Road, where the pavement narrowed to gravel. The studio stood beyond a dry creek crossing behind two black walnut trees. Mrs. Vance began sliding the packet into an envelope, then stopped. Bell, she said, "You're people from around here. My grandfather was Silas Bell. He lived near Kingsport." The pencil in her hair shifted as she raised her head. Silas Avery Bell. Ada nodded. Mrs. Vance sat back slowly. "He used to come through Saltville with a wooden case under his arm, repaired picture frames for my mother. Covered one with wheat straw so fine it looked like watered silk." Ada gripped the edge of the counter. "He learned here," the clerk continued. "At least part of it. There were Bell craftsmen in that hollow before the Depression. The studio belonged to a woman named Miriam Bell for many years. I cannot tell you how she was related. My grandfather never mentioned her. People leave mountains carrying only what they can bear to explain." Mrs. Vance opened another drawer and removed a single worn dollar bill. She set it beside the deed. "You overpaid the filing balance by $1. Ada knew she had not, but the clerk's expression allowed no correction. "Keep it," Ada said. Mrs. Vance folded the bill once and placed it beneath her nameplate. "Then I will keep it until you need it." Outside, the afternoon had sharpened. Ada followed the clerk's map north, carrying the envelope beneath her coat. At the white church, a loose shutter knocked against the siding. Allison Gap Road rose between low fields where cattle watched her without moving. The pavement ended near a mailbox, painted with fading yellow flowers. An elderly man stood there in green coveralls, pulling weeds from the ditch with a bent kitchen fork. His red hound lifted its head from the grass and gave one deep bark. "You headed for the Bell place?" the man asked. "Yes, sir." He pointed with the fork. "Stay left where the road divides. Right branch goes nowhere useful." The hound approached Ada, sniffed the canvas roll, then returned to the man. "Name's Orrin Pike," he said. "Dog's Amos. He'll bark at you until tomorrow. After that, you belong." Beyond his mailbox, walnut trees leaned over the road. Their old husks broke beneath Ada's soles with a bitter green smell. The gravel dwindled into twin tracks, then bare clay. She crossed the dry creek on 3 flat stones and saw the building between the trunks. The studio was smaller than she had imagined, perhaps 22 feet long and 16 wide. Its lower walls were fieldstone. The upper courses were chestnut logs covered by weathered clapboard. The roof sagged near the north eave, and 2 patches of tin had lifted like loose scales. A brick chimney rose from the western wall, missing its top 3 courses. Above the door hung a narrow board. "Bell Straw Works." Most of the paint had gone, but the cut letters remained. The lock had rusted open. Ada lifted the latch and pushed. The swollen door dragged across the floor with a long wooden groan. Cold air met her first carrying, dust mouse nesting, old ash, and something sweet beneath it, like straw warmed long ago and kept in darkness. The front room held a stone fireplace, a pine table, and shelves furred gray with neglect. Light entered through cracked panes and struck floating dust until the air appeared full of slow snow. Her boots sounded hollow on the boards. Somewhere behind the wall claws scratched once and stopped. She tasted lime from the plaster dust when she breathed through her mouth. The rear workshop was reached through a low doorway. Its roof had held better. A long bench remained beneath the windows, along with shallow drawers, a wooden press, and bundles of pale stalks hanging from ceiling pegs. Ada touched one. It collapsed with a dry whisper against her fingers. She found the well behind the building, capped by a warped plank. The outhouse leaned but stood. There was no bucket, no lamp oil, and no food, except the biscuit she had saved from morning. Before dark, she swept a place near the fireplace with a broom whose twigs had worn nearly smooth. She did not risk a fire until the chimney could be examined. Instead, she spread her coat over the floor, placed the canvas tool roll beneath her head, and ate the biscuit in 4 deliberate bites. Night entered through every gap. Wind pressed against the north wall and made one loose nail squeak at intervals. Ada smelled wet stone, old timber, and the faint mineral breath of the valley. When she laid her cheek against the coat sleeve, grit touched her skin. She listened to the building settle around her. No footsteps approached the door. No key turned from the other side. No voice told her how many hours remained. The house had been waiting. Ada spent the first morning making water possible. The well rope had rotted through near the windlass, leaving the bucket somewhere below. She tied Silas's canvas roll shut, lowered the awl on a length of salvaged clothesline, and measured 26 feet before hearing metal strike wood. By noon, she had fashioned a hook from an iron drawer pull and raised the bucket 1 careful inch at a time. The first water came up brown with leaves. The 4th lifting ran clear enough to boil. The outhouse required less ingenuity and more nerve. One corner had sunk into the slope, pulling the door crooked. Ada wedged 2 flat stones beneath the sill, scrubbed the seat with ash and boiled water, and stuffed the largest wall gaps with dry moss. It was not comfort, but it closed. For 3 days, she learned the floor by sound. The board beside the front window gave a short complaint. 2 planks near the workbench answered with a deeper note. One narrow strip outside the rear doorway flexed without noise and had to be crossed close to the wall. At night, she could tell wind from mice and mice from the shifting of old chestnut beams. On the 4th morning, she walked back to Main Street, carrying a list written on the reverse of the condemnation notice. Palmer Hardware and Feed smelled of linseed oil, leather gloves, and cracked corn. Tin seed signs hung from the rafters. Behind the counter stood a broad man with 1 white eyebrow and 1 brown, as if winter had settled on only half his face. "You are the Bell girl," he said. "Ada, Wesley Palmer." He took her list, read it without comment, then turned it over and read the county heading. "I have 43 cents. That complicates commerce. I can work." Wesley rubbed the white eyebrow with 1 finger. "Can you keep figures?" "Yes." "Can you return tools cleaner than you found them?" "Yes." He opened a ledger thick as a family Bible and wrote Ada Bell across the top of a blank page. 30-day account. No interest until spring. After that, we discuss whether you are repairing a building or feeding one. Ada looked at the figures he entered. A galvanized well bucket cost $4.75. 50 feet of 3/8-inch manila rope was $6.40. A chimney brush with 2 extension rods cost $9.85. Stove cement was $3.25. A 5-pound sack of cornmeal was $1.10. He added a box of wooden matches but did not price it. Then he reached beneath the counter and placed a soft-covered book beside the ledger. Its title read, "Household Repairs for Rural Properties, 1949 edition." "Pages are free," he said. "Mistakes are expensive." She carried the bucket and rope back over her shoulders, stopping twice where the road climbed. By afternoon, she had replaced the well line and drawn water without sediment. The chimney waited another day. Ada read the manual's chimney chapter beside the window, then climbed onto the roof using a ladder borrowed from Orrin Pike. The upper bricks were loose enough to lift by hand. She removed them, covered the opening with sacking, and worked from below. She tied the round steel brush to the first rod, pushed it upward through the firebox, turned it clockwise, then added the second section. Resistance came 6 feet above the hearth. She worked the brush in short strokes until black flakes fell around her boots. The creosote was dry and glazed in places thickest where the flue narrowed. She scraped those deposits with a flat iron fixed to the rod, withdrew the brush, swept the hearth, and began again. The work took 5 hours the first day and 3 more the next morning. Soot entered her sleeves, her hair the corners of her mouth. When she finally held a mirror inside the firebox, a clean oval of daylight appeared above. She patched 2 gaps with stove cement and waited until the following afternoon. For the first fire, Ada used 3 walnut twigs, a twist of newspaper from Palmer's counter, and 1 split length of dry pine found beneath the workbench. The flame rose uncertainly, leaned toward the room, then straightened as the chimney warmed. Smoke drew upward without spilling. She held both hands near the heat until her knuckles stopped aching. In a dented saucepan, left on a shelf, she cooked cornmeal with well water and a pinch of salt Wesley had folded into paper. Steam clouded the cracked window. The meal was plain and slightly smoky, but it was hot enough to warm the spoon between each bite. Afterward, she turned to the workshop. Dust had hidden the purpose of nearly everything. Once the surfaces were wiped, the room began to explain itself. A hand press stood beneath the eastern window, its screw cut from maple and darkened by use. 6 bone folders rested in a narrow rack. There was a brass-edged cutting rule, a bundle of rye straw tied with blue thread, 2 small irons for flattening stalks, a shallow tray stained saffron from old dye, and a rosewood knife with no blade. At the far end of this bench sat a rectangular box. Its lid bore a sunburst made from alternating strips of wheat and oat straw. Age had softened the but when Ada tilted it toward the window, the surface changed from bronze to pale gold. The effect came not from pigment, but from the direction of the fibers, each strip laid at a different angle to catch the light. She ran 1 finger around the lid. The box held 12 shallow compartments. 11 contained curled remnants of straw paper patterns and brittle labels written in brown ink. The 12th was empty, except for a cedar disc fitted tightly into its bottom. Ada pressed the disc. It did not move. She lifted the box and heard no rattle, yet its weight seemed wrong. The front half pulled more strongly against her wrists. She set it on the bench, tapped each corner with the pear-wood handle of Silas's awl, and listened. 3 corners gave the quick note of thin wood. The 4th answered dull. Ada removed the compartments and tested the base again. Along the inside edge, a line no wider than a hair ran beneath the cedar disc. She slid the awl into it, stopped when the wood resisted, and withdrew rather than force it. From the stove, she warmed a damp cloth and laid it over the disc for several minutes. The cedar darkened. A faint resinous smell rose into the room. When the wood had swollen evenly, she pressed the edge with both thumbs. The disc turned less than a 1/4 inch. Below, it was a small brass pin. Ada lifted the pin with the awl. Somewhere inside the box, a catch released. The false bottom rose slowly under the pressure of an old strip spring. Beneath it lay 3 packages wrapped in linen, a narrow tin box, and a folded sheet of paper sealed with dark green wax. Ada did not touch the paper first. She carried everything to the pine table in the front room, washed her hands, and placed a clean flour sack beneath the parcels. The first linen wrapping contained tools, a complete rosewood knife fitted with 3 honed blades, 2 ivory-colored folders, a brass divider, and a burnisher made from polished agate. Each piece had been rubbed with oil before storage. The second held raw material. Rye straw lay in grated bundles from cream to deep chestnut. There were coils of split oat straw packets of powdered madder and walnut dye, and 6 thin sheets of blackened paper used as backing. The third parcel was heavier. Inside were currency packets bound with cotton tape and marked in pencil by denomination. Ada counted them once, stopped, and counted again. The bills totaled $48,700. The tin box contained coins arranged in cloth rolls, $20 St. Gaudens pieces, $10 Indian head eagles, silver Morgan dollars, and worn Walking Liberty half dollars. Their face values and recorded collector prices brought the cash to exactly $53,510. At the bottom lay a medal suspended from a faded ribbon. The bronze disc showed an eagle above the words, "For meritorious service." On the reverse, beneath the name partly softened by handling, was the year 1945. Ada placed it apart from the money. The sealed paper remained on the table. She turned it over. The handwriting on the outside was narrow, upright, and unmistakably deliberate. It carried the same long downward stroke Silas used when he wrote her name on birthday cards. She did not break the wax. Instead, Ada returned the coins to their cloth rolls, wrapped the tools, and covered the money with the flour sack. She set the letter beside the cold saucepan and went outside. Evening had lowered over the hollow. Beyond the walnut trees, runoff from the hills had begun moving through the creek bed, a thin line at first, then a continuous ribbon slipping between stones. Ada sat on the flat crossing rock and listened until the water grew dark. The house had been waiting. At first light, Ada carried the sealed page to the eastern window. The wax had cracked along one edge during the night, but the fold remained closed. She turned it in her hands and studied the writing again. The tall A, the narrow loop in the B, and the long final stroke beneath Bell were the same shapes Silas had taught her to make when she was 7. She warmed the seal between her palms and opened it without breaking away the green wax. "My dear one, whoever you are, if you have found this, the box has chosen no one. You chose the work by opening it carefully. My name is Miriam Ruth Bell. Dr. Samuel Pritchard at St. Joseph's Hospital in Asheville told me on March 2, 1987, that the cancer had entered my liver and that I should arrange my affairs." He spoke plainly, which was a kindness. I returned to this hollow and began putting the shop into silence. The Bells worked straw here through 4 generations. Elias Bell, born in 1841 near Wytheville, learned split straw ornament from Moravian cabinet makers passing through Salem and opened this room in 1872. His daughter Lenora, born here in 1878, carried the patterns to Abingdon and taught her daughter Miriam Louise, born in 1903, to cut wheat straw against a brass rule. Miriam Louise was my mother. I was born in 1928 and kept the bench after her hands stiffened. My brother Thomas carried our sample book to Richmond before leaving for the Pacific in 1943. He did not return from the war. Bell Straw Works closed on September 30th, 1954. After that, I repaired frames for neighbors and made small boxes when someone asked. Then more than 30 years passed without an apprentice crossing this threshold. If the tools are still sound, keep them dry. Soak rye straw in water no warmer than 110 degrees for 10 to 12 minutes. Split it along the natural seam, then flatten it on steel heated only until a drop of water trembles but does not leap. Mix hide glue, 1 part granules to 2 parts water, and let it swell overnight before warming it gently. Press each finished panel for 6 hours, then leave it beneath weight until the next morning. Do not polish against the grain. The light lives in the direction of the fiber. The money came slowly. Repair payments, war bonds, my mother's savings, and what remained after Thomas's affairs were settled. It is not a reward for finding the box. It is time stored in another form. Use it to keep the roof above the bench, the chimney drawing, and your hands free enough to learn. Inheritance is not owning what the dead possessed. It is accepting the unfinished work without pretending it will be easy. A tool becomes yours only after your hand has made an honest mistake with it. If you cannot stay close the box and leave it for someone else. If you remain, make one thing carefully before you make many. Let the first piece be small enough that pride cannot hide inside it. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Miriam Ruth Bell, April 17, 1987. Ada read the letter once without moving. Then she read it again, slower, touching each line with the blunt end of Silas's awl. When she finished, she folded the paper along its original creases, pressed the wax fragments together, and returned it to the flour sack. The letter had mentioned a boundary marker behind the workshop, though not as part of the inheritance. Miriam had written one sentence beneath her signature. Thomas's name is on the stone beyond the back door, where Mother could see it from the bench. Ada crossed the yard through wet grass. Behind a tangle of blackberry canes stood a low limestone marker green with lichen. She cleared it with the side of her hand. Thomas Elias Bell, 1921 to 1944, lost at sea. Below the dates was a small carved sunburst matching the lid of the straw box. Ada remained there until water soaked through the knees of her trousers. She did not speak. Before returning inside, she placed one flat creek stone at the base of the marker, careful not to cover the name. In the workshop, she chose the old flattening iron with the least rust. She cleaned its face with fine ash and a scrap of wool, then set it on the stove. When the metal warmed, she laid one surviving strip of rye straw across it. The fiber softened beneath her bone folder and opened into a ribbon of muted gold. The gesture was small enough to fit inside her palm. That afternoon, the people who had carried her without asking for her history came back to her in separate images, the farmer's wife setting coffee on a gate post, Mr. Hale leaving the church vestibule unlocked, the librarian in red glasses pointing her toward the radiator, Mrs. Vance placing $1 beneath her nameplate. None of them had solved her life. Each had moved one stone from the road. Before we go on, think of one small kindness someone once gave you when they had no obligation to help. What was it, and why do you still remember it? Tell us in the comments. Sometimes the smallest mercy is the one a person carries longest. After dark, Ada wrapped the rosewood knife, brass divider folders, and agate burnisher in clean linen. She placed them beside her coat on the floor, with Miriam's letter beneath the tool roll. For the first time since entering the studio, she slept with both hands open. Snow arrived on December 3, 5 inches laid quietly across Bell Hollow before dawn. Ada woke to a white rectangle of light at the eastern window and a new drip striking the saucepan beside her head. By breakfast, 3 dark circles had spread across the ceiling. She read the roofing chapter 3 times, once beside the stove and twice beneath the damaged rafters. The main roof measured 24 feet by 18, allowing for the overhang. With waste and overlap, she calculated 11 bundles of cedar shingles, 2 rolls of 30-pound felt, and 12 pounds of galvanized nails. Wesley Palmer studied her figures, corrected one multiplication with a carpenter's pencil, and disappeared into the rear room of the store. He returned carrying a roofing hatchet with a square pole and a gauge pin worn smooth. "My brother Ellis used this," he said. "He won't be needing it." Ada accepted it with both hands. The skilled help came from Orrin Pike, who had roofed barns and churches for 42 years before his knees refused ladders. He arrived in a wool cap, carrying a chalk box, and refusing the money Ada offered from the cash. "Pay me by keeping weather out." They began with the north slope. Ada removed rotten shingles while Orrin tested each rafter with the point of his knife. One had split near the plate, so they sistered it with a straight length of seasoned oak, fastening the new timber alongside the old with bolts and square washers. Orrin snapped a blue chalk line across the felt and showed her how each cedar course must break the joints beneath it. His nail technique took 3 strokes, one to place, one to drive, one light tap, to seat the head without crushing the shingle. "That nail's proud. Set it lower." Ada struck once. "Pull it. Start again from square." For 11 days they worked whenever the roof was dry enough to hold a boot. Snow melted into Ada's cuffs, cedar dust collected in the seams of her gloves. At noon, they ate bread near the chimney, their backs against the warmer brick. On December 14, Ada drove the final ridge nail. She climbed down, crossed the yard, and looked back. The roofline was straight for the first time in decades. That night, rain moved over the hollow firm and steady, and not one drop reached the floor. January exposed the chimney. The first hard freeze loosened the outer faces of several bricks. Their surfaces flaked away and red scales and mortar beneath them powdered between Ada's fingers. When she brushed the joints, pale dust fell like flour onto the hearth. Wesley sold her a bag of hydraulic lime and measured fire clay into a paper sack. Ada mixed 3 parts lime mortar to 1 part fire clay for the flue joints, adding water slowly until the mortar held a ridge beneath the trowel without slumping. She removed only 6 bricks at a time. Each sound brick was brushed, dampened, and returned to its original course. The ruined ones came from a stack behind Oren's barn, salvaged years earlier from a smokehouse built in the same period. For 3 weeks, the daytime temperature remained in the 20s. Ada worked barehanded because gloves dulled her sense of the joints. Every 15 minutes, her fingers went numb. She climbed down, held them near the stove until the pain returned, then went back to the scaffold. The upper courses required a narrow crown and a stone cap bedded deeply enough to shed water. She tooled each joint inward, wiped the brick faces with burlap, and covered the work overnight with an old wool blanket to slow the cure. On January 29th, she built a test fire from pine splints and 3 pieces of dry walnut. The flame climbed quickly. Ada stepped outside and watched a clean gray thread rise from the chimney, turn east in the wind, and disappear above the bare trees. Inside, no smoke touched the room. Late January belonged to the floors. Beneath years of dirt, the front room held white pine planks nearly 14 inches wide, fastened with hand-cut rose-head nails. Several heads stood high where the wood had shrunk. Ada set them carefully with a punch, unwilling to replace iron that had remained in place for more than a century. She rented a random orbit sander from Palmer Hardware for $14 a day. Wesley made her promise not to linger in one spot and burn a hollow into the pine. The first pass used 80 grit paper and lifted a black skin of soot grease and old wax. The second, at 120 grit, removed the circular scratches. The third, at 220, quieted the grain until the boards felt smooth beneath her palm, but not newly manufactured. Dust found every opening. Ada tied cloth across her mouth, sealed the workshop door, and swept between passes. By evening, her eyebrows had turned pale. She warmed the first coat of oil near the stove and worked it into the wood with folded linen following each plank from wall to wall. 2 more coats followed, each thin enough to sink rather than shine. Then she left the room untouched for 48 hours. The color moved slowly from dark honey toward mahogany. Old saw marks remained visible near the hearth. A crescent-shaped scar beside the doorway stayed exactly where generations of boots had made it. One morning she could not lift the sander. Nothing was broken. The room simply seemed too narrow, the work too large, and every tool heavier than it had been the evening before. Ada walked to the marsh below the old salt works and sat on a fallen sycamore. A great blue heron stood in the shallows, motionless, except for the wind moving the feathers at its neck. Ada watched it for nearly 2 hours. She did no work that day. The following morning, she returned and finished the final oil coat before breakfast. February brought the windows. There were 8. 3 had no glass at all. 4 held cracked panes patched with cardboard or old feed sacks. Only one window, the small western sash beside the chimney, retained its original glass from 1788, wavering gently where the pane had cooled unevenly during manufacture. Ada preserved that one untouched. For the others, she removed the brittle putty with a warmed knife, lifted the remaining glazing points, and cleaned each wooden rabbet without cutting into the sash. Wesley ordered restoration glass thin enough to resemble the surviving panes. Ada rolled DAP 33 glazing putty between her palms until it softened, pressed a narrow bedding layer into the rabbet, and set each pane against it. After fixing the glass with points, she drew the putty knife along the outside edge in one continuous stroke, leaving a clean bevel that would shed rain. The sash cords had become gray fibers inside the channels. She replaced them with quarter-inch cotton cord, feeding each line over the pulley and tying a figure-8 knot before lowering it into the counterweight pocket. The work required patience more than strength. One sash jammed because Ada had reversed the weights. Another slipped from her hands and would have broken had her boot not stopped it against the wall. On the final window, she trimmed the putty at the lower corner and raised the sash. Cold air entered, carrying the smell of wet bark. A chickadee landed on the walnut branch outside. It turned its black-capped head toward her, tapped the branch once with its feet, and remained while Ada lowered the window into place. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Ada completed her first full piece of straw marquetry. It was not large. Miriam's letter had warned against beginning with anything pride could hide inside, so Ada chose a rectangular tea box, no longer than her hand. She split pale rye straw, warmed it on the old steel plate, and arranged the fibers in a quiet sunburst around a dark walnut center. Each strip changed color when the box turned toward the window, though no dye had touched it. The lid required 3 attempts. She removed the second pattern after discovering one line drifting less than the width of a fingernail. When the glue had cured, Ada polished the surface with the agate burnisher and placed the finished box on Silas's old canvas tool roll. The studio no longer admitted rain or snow. Lime-washed walls reflected the fire without appearing new. Restored windows held the sky in uneven panes, and the white pine floor carried every old scar beneath its dark oil. The workbench remained beneath the eastern windows, exactly where morning light could expose an impatient cut. The brass key from the cellar had rested on the mantel through both winters. Ada tried it in the desk, the tool chest, the hand press, and every surviving cabinet. It fit nothing. She stopped testing it after the first spring and allowed it to become another unanswered object in the room. The answer came during a December windstorm. A dead limb broke from the larger walnut tree and struck the ground beside the back path. When Ada went outside to clear it, she noticed a rectangle of green metal set into the trunk's sheltered side, half covered by bark. The plate bore the Bell sunburst. Beneath it was a keyhole. The brass key turned with resistance, then released a narrow iron door built into an old hollow. Inside lay a parcel wrapped in oilcloth. Ada carried it to the workshop before opening it. The first fold revealed a 48-star American flag, its cotton darkened at the creases but carefully kept. Beneath the flag was a note dated June 18, 1944, written by Miriam Louise Bell, while her son Thomas served in the Pacific. "My dear Thomas, I have put this flag where the walnut will keep it dry. If you come home, we will open it together. If you do not, whoever continues the work must know that your place at this bench was not lost simply because your chair remained empty. A family does not honor the missing by closing every door they touched." Ada read the note at the eastern window. Then she folded it into the flag and returned both to the oilcloth. The compartment in the tree was still sound, but she did not put them back. Some things had waited long enough in darkness. On September 2, the 80th anniversary of the formal end of the Second World War, Ada carried Thomas Bell's medal to the Southwest Virginia Veterans Cemetery in Dublin. His body had never been recovered, so there was no grave beneath his name. She placed the medal beside the cemetery's memorial stone, stood through one long gust of wind, then brought it home. The money remained largely untouched. Ada sold 3 Walking Liberty $50 and 1 Morgan dollar through a dealer recommended by Mrs. Vance. The proceeds paid for straw conservation paper, hide glue, and a proper fireproof cabinet. She used no bills and no gold pieces. The remaining cash went back beneath the cedar disc sealed in linen and accompanied by a new inventory written in Ada's hand. On the first page, she added 4 words. For the next one, she reopened Bell Straw Works without a sign in the newspaper or an announcement from the county. One morning, she pinned an index card to the corkboard inside Ria's cafe. Straw marquetry, repairs, and small commissions, Bell Hollow road work, completed slowly. Doris moved the card higher, so a menu would not cover it. Within a month, Ada received 6 requests. By spring, more than 40 names had been written into a mailing ledger, people who wanted a repaired frame, a small box, or simply notice when another piece became available. Ada accepted only what the bench could hold. Caleb returned in April, taller than when he had first arrived with the splitting maul. He carried a long object wrapped in an army blanket and leaned it against the studio wall. "I made something," he said. The sign was carved from walnut. It matched the proportions of the old board above the door, but Caleb had left the tool marks visible around the letters. Bell Straw Works and Daughters. Ada read the second line twice. "There have not been daughters here for years," she said. "There's one now." She did not correct the plural. Together, they removed the weathered sign and mounted the new one beneath the eave. The old board was preserved inside the workshop above Miriam's handpress. When the wind shifted, the walnut sign made a low wooden knock against its iron brackets. That evening, Ada opened a sheet of cream paper and began a letter. "My dear one, whoever you are," she explained where the cedar catch was hidden and how the tools should be oiled. She recorded the temperature of the flattening plate, the soaking time for winter rye, and the place where the roof still required watching after an eastern storm. She wrote that not every object in the house needed to be opened immediately, and that a person could leave one mystery untouched until patience made room for its answer. She did not write about rescue. She wrote about roofs, joints, grain direction, and the necessity of returning a borrowed tool cleaner than it had arrived. She wrote that rest was part of careful work. Beside that sentence, she drew a small blue heron. Ada folded the unfinished letter and placed it in the straw inlay box. Outside evening settled over Bell Hollow. Water passed over the creek stones without hurry. The restored windows held the last pale light, and the walnut branches touched the roof with their smallest twigs. The house had been waiting. Ada closed the workshop door, but did not lock it. The new sign moved once above her, the carved words briefly catching the light. "The Straw Marquetry Studio waits. It has always waited." In the county clerk's office, beneath Loretta Vance's nameplate, the worn dollar bill remained folded in the back of the desk drawer. Mrs. Vance had retired, but the new clerk had been instructed not to spend it. A note around it read, "Return to Ada Bell when she says she needs it." She never had. The Heroic Veteran Dogs is a fictional channel created to entertain, educate, and inspire the audience by exploring the deep, loyal bond between veterans and their dogs. All channel content does not represent real individuals, actual events, or documented cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, or events is entirely coincidental.